Hello, and welcome to today's introduction class. I'll be taking you a few things about SpaceClaim, such as starting a part from scratch, and also working with imported geometry. To start with, let's look at our welcome screen. Our welcome screen will give us quick tips and hints on how to start working in SpaceClaim. One of the key things here is our quick reference card. If we click that, we'll get a document that can be printed and kept next to your machine to give you hints on selection or orientation, or about some of the key terminology we use in SpaceClaim. Additionally, here you'll be able to get help and also tutorials and documents online. Another key thing to look at when starting SpaceClaim is the UI. For example, the Design tab houses everything we need to start sketching and also editing geometry. Detail will allow you to add 3D dimensions and notes to your design and also help you work in a drawing sheet. Display controls all of our graphical representations in our design, such as changing the color of parts and also changing the graphics display, in addition to displaying how we display the grid. Measure will let you display surface quality and also measure between parts. Repair lets you clean up imported geometry, and Prepare gets models ready for analysis. Today we'll be focusing on just the sketch group and our editing groups. Now the last thing I'd like to show you with the UI is under the application menu. That's located in the top left-hand corner of the screen. And here we'll be able to open new designs, save designs, and print, in addition to looking at our SpaceClaim options. SpaceClaim's options first off gives you popular options, which controls a lot of our display options and interface options. Units will allow you to change between metric and imperial. And the other key area to look at is navigation. In SpaceClaim, we spin by holding down the middle mouse button, pan with Shift and the middle mouse button, and zoom with Control and the middle mouse button. Now you can go and change any of these navigation tools to either different styles or individual edits. And once you're finished, click OK. So now we'll start to make a design from scratch. And to begin with, I'll choose one of our sketch tools, like Rectangle. Notice that if I hover over any of the tools, I'll get a quick tooltip, just a brief description of what that tool does. I'll click once to start our sketch, and now if I type in a dimension or a number, I can tab to get the other box. So I can keep tabbing between these dimensions until I'm ready. And once I've finished, I'll hit Enter to set that rectangle. Now we can see curves have been created in our structure tree. Let's sketch something else. And I'll make a 3-point arc. And I'll select you to point out that at the bottom it says press F1 for more help. And if I do that, I'll get some context-sensitive help on that tool. So this will display a little bit more information on what the tool does and also how to use it. Okay, let's click on this and get started. We'll click once to start the 3-point arc. I'll click a second time to set the length, and my third click will set the radius. Now notice that we've added an arc to the structure tree. And all of our tools on the left, line, rectangle, circle, will allow you to add sketch entities to it, to the grid. Now our tools on the right side will let you edit your sketches, such as creating rounded corners, offsetting lines, or projecting onto a sketch. Additionally, we have a tool called Bend that allows you to take a straight line, and if you drag on it, it will bend that into an arc. So just to show you that there's a lot of different tools and a lot of ways you can get your design done. And also notice that that line that used to be there has switched to an arc. Now the last thing I'll show you with sketching is how to trim geometry. You can create rounded corners, you can trim lines away, or you can split lines in half. I'll be showing you the trim tool, and by clicking on that, you can choose to remove any line from your sketch. Just by clicking on that line, it will remove from the sketch. And now that we've finished our sketch, we need to go into 3D. So notice that there's 3 different modes that we have here. We have a sketch mode, a section mode, and 3D. Now by pressing 3D, notice that the closed loop of lines will turn into a surface. Now the first way that we can create geometry is by using the pull tool. Pull will do all of your geometry creation and modification. I'll click pull and then choose the surface. Now I can start to pull this and stretch this into a solid. And notice that I don't have to pick on the arrow that's there. I can drag anywhere on screen and I'll start to make geometry from that surface and thicken it into a solid. Now I can stop and type in a value like 0.5 and have it snap into place. And just to remind you, I can spin with the middle mouse button, pan with shift and the middle mouse button, and zoom with control and the middle mouse button. But now that we've made our first solid, let's add to this model. And I'll go back into a sketch. Now to go back into a sketch, I could either click that sketch tool again, or just click any of our sketch tools here, like circle for instance. That will place a temporary grid on the model, and you can see near my cursor there's a little checkerboard, and what it's asking me to do is choose where I'd like to start sketching. And notice if I hover over the different faces, it'll place the grid there. And one shortcut that I use a lot is querying through the model. And I can do that by rolling the middle mouse button forward. That will allow me to quickly select on hidden faces. So without rotating this model, I can quickly select on the front, top, or back faces. I'm going to put the grid on the top though and click here. And I'd also like to point out our mini toolbar, which will allow you to get quickly into 3D, will allow you to select a new sketch plane, just like I was doing, move the grid, or jump to a plan view. So once in a plan view, just like to also point out that we can control this from the Orient group. And also notice that it says plan view with V in quotations. I mean V in parentheses, I should say. And that's just the shortcut for that tool. Just like S is the shortcut for select, P is the shortcut for pull, and M is the shortcut for move. But now let's start sketching. And I'm going to create a circle. And I'm going to snap this so it's coaxial with our circle here. And you can do that just by getting close to the center, and you'll see there's a green dot that appears on screen. And by clicking that, you can now create a circle. And you can type in any dimension you like. I'll type in 3/4. Another thing that will help out while you're sketching and while you're starting out in Space Claim is one more option. So I'll go into the Space Claim options, and under Popular, you can turn on status messages in the design window. By doing that, notice you'll get a quick status message in the upper left-hand corner of the screen. So notice as I hover over geometry, it'll let me know what I'm snapping to, whether it's the grid, which you can turn on and off in the options, or whether I'm snapping to geometry on the model. Here I can see that I'm now coaxial to the curved center. And once I get close to the circle on the other side of the model, I can snap to the equal radius. Now, one thing that's important is to precisely dimension your sketches. So to do that, I can use Cartesian or polar dimensions. I'll create a Cartesian dimension to start. And notice that it starts dimensioning you from the last place you've clicked. Now that's sometimes useful, but other times we want to click our own base point. So for that, we can use our tool guides on the right side of the screen, allowing you to select a tool guide and move the base point to a new location. So now I can dimension from different points on the model. And a shortcut for this is to just tap the Shift key as you hover over an endpoint or a line. Here, if I hover over this green triangle, which marks the midpoint, I can tap Shift, which will help me precisely dimension to the center of this model. So we'll just type in our dimension as 0 by 1. Now we can precisely create this dimension. We'll create one circle and another coaxial to it. And now that we've finished our sketch, we can go back into 3D to create solids or cutouts from this. I'd like to point out another quick way to get into 3D, and that's by pressing the pull button. Because pull is usually the first action you'll do once leaving a sketch, we can click that and immediately get into 3D. Basically, because we can't thicken anything in a 2D sketch. And now that we have this, I want you to notice that there's no additional surfaces in the structure tree. Because we were sketching on a face, we've imprinted these regions onto the solid. So if I click one of these regions, I can pull to create geometry, or pull through the opposite side to cut geometry away, or to pull multiple regions at a time, I'll just hold down the Control key to either drag them up into pins or through into holes. Now another thing that comes up a lot with the pull tool is our mini toolbar. Notice once I click a face, a mini toolbar will pop up. This represents a subset of our pull options. And this is important because let's say we'd like to edit the height of this face. I can pull up or down, and I can see the offset from its original location. But if I was unsure of where that was to start with, knowing that it's 0.32 inches from that location sometimes doesn't help. And so what I'd like to do is probably create a ruler dimension. Remember, that's the same as this button here. And that will allow me to dimension from another location. I can dimension from our upper face or the lower face on the model. And now I can type in a dimension that I might have a better idea of how it affects the model. So we can make that boss 0.75 inches. Now that we've made that boss, let's hop into one more sketch. And if I have a face selected, so if I click on this front face, and now pick a sketch tool, it'll start me immediately sketching on that face. Now I'd like to get into a plan view, so again, without clicking plan view up here, or in our tool guide, remember I can use some keyboard shortcuts, like V, to quickly get into a plan view. And I'm going to start sketching a rectangle from the center point. I'll make this 0.325 by 0.625. And remember, I started from the center of this line here. And I might want to have this geometry mirrored to the other side. Now, to mirror in a sketch, you can right-click a line and set it as a mirror line. This will allow you to sketch on one side of it and have it automatically mirrored to the other side. Now everything will get mirrored that's you're creating new, and also if lines are pre-existing, like here for instance, you can just click the select tool and select them to mirror them to the other side. If you delete things on one side, select them and press the delete key, they'll delete on the other, until you either right-click and turn off the mirror line, or select the mirror line and delete it entirely. So now you can delete something or add something on one side and not have it mirrored to the other. And again, once I'm finished with this sketch, I'll click the pull tool, and that closed region is now a surface. So now let's look at a few more of our pull options. And I'll click on this face, and I'll pull it outward, and it'll add geometry. And if I start pulling it through the model, it'll start to cut geometry away. Now this might be the operation I wanted, but if not, I can go up to a quick access toolbar and press the undo button, or also the shortcut for undo is Control-Z. And I might want it to select this face, and now with the add button, I can override SpaceClaim's guessing system, where instead of having it guess whether I want it to add or subtract geometry from the model, I can tell it explicitly what I'd like it to do, and have it add geometry all the way through. We might want to undo again, and this time, I'll use one of the tool guides. Tool guides on the right side of the screen will change the function of your tool slightly. So, for example, letting you draft geometry, or sweep geometry, or rotate geometry. One of the tool guides I use most often is the up to button. This allows me to take a face or a surface. I'll choose our up to tool guide and choose where I'd like to snap that face. So for example, I can snap it up to this cylindrical face just by clicking it. And now we have a tight fit on that solid. Now the last thing I'd like to show you with the pull tool is edges. Because so far I've been clicking and modifying on faces, whether they're cylinders or planes. In addition to this though, you're able to click and edit edges. Notice how edges look different from faces. They'll be displayed in bright green, and your arrow or your cursor will be pointed directly at it. So if you pull on an edge, the default action is for you to place a round on the part. So we can add a round to one side, or I can click an edge and add a round on that. Now another thing to point out is if I press escape while I'm in the middle of an action, it will cancel it. Because I might not want to round one edge, I can double click to get a loop of edges. And if I continue to double click, I'll cycle through the different edge loops that are possible. So now that I have this loop of edges, I can round them all at the same time. And I can even take one edge and use our up to button and snap that to another round. And so now that we've finished this part, let's look at working with this as an assembly. And there's one important thing I'd like to point out before we insert an assembly into our design. And I'm going to go to our file options under our SpaceClaim options. So here we can see we have our file options. And one thing that is important is create multiple documents when importing assemblies. Now what this option does is decides whether you'd like all of the geometry to be contained in a single file, or if you'd like to have an assembly file with a lot of referenced parts. I'm going to turn this option off and show you how it looks. So let's go up to File, and we'll insert some geometry into this design. If we open geometry, it will open up into a new tab. Versus File Insert, we'll bring all the geometry into this window. So I'm going to insert a step file. Some of the different file types you can import with our data exchange packages. And I'm just going to double click on this assembly. So now here we can see that we have all of these parts brought in from the step file. And they're located here. And you'll notice if you right click on them, you can convert them to external. And that option I had is changed, automatically internalized all of our documents. So what that allows us to do is quickly rework our assembly. I can right click on solid and move that to a new component, and we can call that base. So now we notice we have these two components in our structure tree, and we can drag and drop from base into assembly, or I could right click on assembly and make an empty new component, and we'll call that screw. So now I could drag and drop several components into that one. So you have a lot of control on reworking your assembly when you have everything internalized. And you also may be noticing that screw is in bold and a lot of our components are grayed out. Now this means that screw is the active component, and it also means that I can only edit the active component, so I can't pull on any of the inactive components. Another key thing to point out is that if I create new geometry, it'll be created directly under the active component. So if you're editing a solid in an assembly or making a new component, it's important to activate it before you start, or else you'll have to drag and drop your solids to a new location afterwards. But I'm just going to activate our top level and delete this extra solid. And the next thing we'll look at is assembling components together. And you'll notice that all of our assembly commands are turned off, because the two important things are that the solids need to be in their own components to assemble them, and also you need to have faces pre-selected to use them. For instance, I'll select on one cylindrical face here, and Control select another. Now when I hit center, the first face will center onto the second one, and it will snap into place. The same works for a line. I'll click our first face. Remember, I can Control select another face, and by using our query select and rolling our mouse wheel forward, I can select that face without having to rotate the model. So query select is a nice shortcut. Now that I have those two selected, I can align those faces and snap them into place. And now that you'll see that if I try to move our component, I can only rotate it in the blue direction. If I try to drag it in the red or the green direction, it won't move. And that's because I have these assembly conditions set up. I could toggle them off and now move our component to a new location, or if I turn them back on, the geometry will snap back into place. So there's just a few more things to look at with our introduction class. And one of them is going to be section mode. Because I've shown how we can edit geometry in 3D, but we can also edit geometry in a familiar 2D cross-section. Now the first thing we need to do is set up a section. And so I'm going to zoom in and just point out that if you hover over any cylindrical face, you'll see a temporary axis appear. Now you also have the choice to insert an axis or a plane, and these will live in your structure tree. You can move them to new locations, you can drag them along, and you can also select them, and they're really helpful for helping you construct geometry. But I'm going to delete them for now, and I'm just going to select on this axis and click our section button. That will place the section mode, or section, through the axis in usually one of the normal orientations, either the top, front, or right views. But again, let's do a quick plan view of this and zoom in. So here we can see the geometry in our cross-section. And one thing I'd like to show you is how we can edit the geometry in this section. We can select on our base screw component and move the geometry to a new location. Additionally, I can use the pull tool in section, select on what looks like an edge, and pull that to a new location. And what looks like an edge is actually a face in 3D. Just like an edge, or just like a point, represents an edge. So this allows you to modify geometry while you're looking at it in 2D. Now another thing to look at are some of our other tools, such as Combine. Combine allows you to do all of our Boolean operations in SpaceClaim. It stands for the combination of any two objects. And so the first thing it asks you to do is to click a target. And that will be our green solid here. And I'd also like to point out is that you'll notice that selecting in the cross-hatching really doesn't do anything. That's because what actually defines the solid are all of the outer faces or surfaces. So we'll click that edge, and we'll have our green solid be the target. Now we can see here that I can click to select a cutter object, or I can press Control to merge something into our target. So if I just click this as the cutter, it will cut our solid into two different sections and also remove the cutter from the model. Now we can undo and bring that back, and we can look at our new options. Remember that we have different options for different tools. So now that I'm in the Combine tool, I can choose to keep that cutter as I select it. So now we have our cutter, we still have our geometry, or our green solid, split into two different regions. And if I click on one region, it'll be removed from the model. Now let's go back into 3D and go into a home view. Now again, we can press the home button, or we could press H for home view. So the last thing I want to look at is our solid here. And to open geometry in its own window, you can right-click and hit Open Component. And you'll see that that creates a new tab at the bottom of the screen. So here, we can look at one of our last buttons, and that's going to be the Fill button. The Fill tool simplifies geometry from the model. You'll notice if I click on a round and then click Fill, it'll remove that round from the model. Now if I Control select several rounds and click Fill, I'll remove them together. And this also works for faces that aren't rounds. and we'll use this and it will extend all of the geometry around it to remove it. So another thing we can do to speed this up is use power select. This works by selecting around, and we can either have it search or click the find button to have it automatically query through the model to find like references. So here it's found all equal rounds, but I can also have it locate all equal or smaller rounds. And now that I have them, I can fill them all in at the same time. And this just helps in simplifying the model. And the last thing I'll show you is how to put this on a drawing sheet. And to do this, we'll go back to our application menu and we'll click on New Drawing Sheet. That will take your part or assembly and automatically place this on a drawing sheet. So here you can move some of the views around. You can change the format, so change the sheet size, use a custom format that you generate, or remove the format so you get a white sheet. You can also place in new views, such as a general view or a cross-section of the part. And you can also place notes or dimensions onto the model as well. You can click a line to place a dimension on it. If you select two lines, you'll create a dimension between them. You also have the ability to place linear dimensions or radial dimensions, so I can place the diameter quickly. And also to place any notes, you can type those on screen here. And if you right-click, you'll get our context menu here, where I can change the font, change the size, or quickly create a leader note. So this concludes the introduction class, and I hope you've learned a little bit about sketching, pulling, creating geometry from scratch, working with imported geometry, and also bringing geometry into a drawing sheet. Thank you very much for watching.